Hello and welcome to another edition of the Geeks Group podcast. I'm your host Karim, with me your co-host Josie, and today we have a special guest, Rick Cole. Rick is the Chief Deputy Controller for the City of Los Angeles with an impressive track record. Rick, welcome to our podcast.
Karim and Josie, glad to be on.
Josie, welcome as always.
Of course, always happy to have. And now joining us, Rick's amazing. Thank you.
So today we'll be diving into the 21st century government. In a world that is rapidly evolving, 20th century mindset that once guided the workings of nations no longer fits the dynamic, interconnected, and technologically driven 21st century landscape. It's about changing mindsets, shifting the way we think about governance, and the roles we all play in shaping our collective future. But how do we transition from the old one to the new? How do we redefine the role of government to better serve the needs and aspirations of the constituents? Today, we're going to explore this pivotal shift from the bureaucratic hierarchical structure of the past to agile, inclusive, and innovative models of governance demanded by the present and the future. We'll explore the shift by focusing on a critical case study. We were going to tackle the homelessness issue here in the city of LA. It's an issue that encapsulates the challenges and opportunities of governments faced within the 21st century. Today, we have just the person to help us do that with the wealth of experience and expertise to talk about the issue. Rick, welcome to the show. The difference between the 20th and the 21st century mindset. Why is it important, and how can it change our perspective?
When you talk to people who are involved in the public sector, they often take for granted that the shape of the government we have today is the shape that we've always had since forever. But in fact, the shape of government that we inherit was largely shaped in the early years of the 20th century in response to a very particular set of problems. American cities across the board were growing, they were welcoming immigrants, they were industrializing, and that presented a particular set of challenges. And we invented police departments, fire departments, parks departments to meet the needs of those times. Well, it's 100 years later. And it's important to recognize that the needs have changed. In many ways, we've solved some of the problems of 100 years ago. Let me give you one quick example. We used to have an enormous number of dangerous, deadly fires in American cities. So we established robust fire departments to meet that challenge. When I was city manager in Santa Monica, I looked at the stats for 15,464 emergency calls to the fire department. When I asked people how many of those were for fires, people scratch their heads and say, I don't know, 50%, 90%, 10%. It's actually less than 1%. It was, we had 47 structure fires in the city of Santa Monica, less than one a week. That's a tremendous victory. The fire departments have a great deal of credit for that. We have very strong building codes. We inspect buildings. We have fire sprinklers. We have fire and smoke alarms. We've built a robust consciousness. People don't smoke in bed anymore. The result is we've basically conquered fires. That doesn't mean we don't need fire departments, because we still have fires and they are just as deadly as they ever were. But it does mean the fire department is doing something completely different than fighting fires 99% of the time. And so 21st century government is recognizing that time has moved on and we have new challenges, new problems. Homelessness is not a problem that we had 100 years ago, at least not in the form it takes today. And yet we don't have a homelessness department because we are stuck in the structures that we inherited from our grandparents and even our great-grandparents. Another fundamental difference between 20th century and 21st century government, I think, is we focused on service delivery, right? We invented these departments because the private sector couldn't fight fires. It couldn't provide mass books for people who couldn't afford the ones that are purchased in stores. Those problems are kind of in the rear view mirror. And so we continue to provide services that were designed for the problems of 100 years ago, instead of thinking about, well, if we were starting today, what would it look like? And it would look very different than the government we've inherited. So I guess the final thing that I would share in terms of the difference between 20th and 21st century government is in the public sector, particularly in local government, we'll think, well, how are we doing? How's Los Angeles doing compared to Glendale? How's Pasadena doing compared to Long Beach? How is San Francisco doing compared to Seattle? That's really not the way the average citizen looks at their government, because they only live in one place. And they're not thinking about, well, gee, my cousin lives in Seattle and blah, blah, blah. In fact, what they're thinking about is, I can go on my phone right now, and in 2 clicks, I can order something from Amazon and it will be delivered to me tomorrow. If it's the weekend and I'm trying to figure out if I need a permit from my local city to get a new water heater, or whether that's something I can just go get a plumber or just go do myself, you'll be spending a half an hour finding the right answer, if you're lucky, on the web page. And it'll say, mail in this PDF and we'll get back to you. That's what people are grappling with. In the 21st century, we need to stop comparing ourselves government to government. We need to be comparing ourselves to what technology has enabled the private sector to do, often at the touch of a couple clicks.
Something you said that really stood out was, if we were to do it all over again, how would we do it right now? I think a lot of the inherited legacy processes don't allow us to do that, mainly because there's probably a lot of ongoing initiatives or a lot of just historical baggage that makes it difficult to change. And for new problems like homelessness, which we'll be talking about today, I guess because it is a new problem, a fairly new problem, it's a great opportunity to apply that logic of how can we tackle this today with today's technology, as opposed to, similar to the fire department, how could we make it fit in an existing department and see what they can do with the resources they have, because maybe they're underused, right? So just to share some statistics, there's been a 6% rise in homelessness the past year. There's about 75,000, a little over that, homeless people in LA County. So do those numbers surprise you, Rick?
The one thing, though, that we ought to start out with is, where do those numbers come from, right? When I was mayor of Pasadena in 1993, I thought that the U.S. Census had grotesquely underestimated the number of homeless people in our community when they did the 1990 census. And so I'd read in Governing Magazine that City Back East had actually gone out and done their own homeless count. So, well, why don't we do that in Pasadena? And my colleagues on the city council supported me, and we organized a homeless count. It turned out to be the 3rd in the nation, the 1st in California. And by the way, it's now required by the federal government that that every city, at least once every other year, do exactly the same thing we did back in 1993, which is send out volunteers to cover a particular part of the city, usually in teams of 4. They count tents, they count sleeping bags, they look at people that are sleeping in doorways or under bridges, and they mark all those down, and then those are all tabulated. Usually takes a few months, and then a number is announced, and it's announced like 75,467, as if we actually knew to that degree of certainty how many homeless people. Once a year, in the middle of the night, many times guesstimating, and sometimes missing people. And it can depend a lot on how cold it is, right? Because the colder it is, the less visible people who are homeless are going to be. They're going to be burrowing in to stay warm. So the number which we treat as if it were actual number is a guesstimate. And so if it's up 6%, it could have been up 10, it could have been down 5. We just really don't have really accurate data to back up those numbers. Here's what we should be doing 30 years later. Every service provider, every firefighter, every police officer, every bus driver, every ambassador in a business improvement district should have on their phone an app that provides them real-time information about the unhoused individuals that they're likely to encounter. That is possible today, and in fact we did that in Santa Monica, and it was an enormously useful tool to put in the hands of our folks. Otherwise, they're coming up to someone as if they're a stranger, right? As if we know nothing about them, and yet we know a tremendous amount about them because we're constantly encountering them. They have encounters with police department, both negative and positive. They have encounters with fire departments who respond as someone calls and says, "Hey, there's someone lying down in my alley. Can you check on them?" They're interacting with social service agencies. So we know an enormous amount about them, but what we're not doing is collating and sharing that data so we can get the right help to the right people at the right time and get them off the street. So there's an example, a perfect example of how 21st century government could transform the outcomes and actually make a huge dent in the number of people we see out on our streets.
Talking about the count of homelessness, we always say we have a high count of homelessness, which comes with its own set of issues and risk. I guess it's shocking to know that the high count that we all have in our mind, it's probably grossly underestimated. And the question is, what are the issues that may arise from having a higher count of population than the one estimated, and what are the government agencies, how are they engaging that sector of the population today?
Again, in terms of 21st century government, how would we do things differently if we weren't inheriting some of the legacy bureaucracies that have built up over the last century? If we were thinking freshly about how to tackle this problem, we'd be thinking about, well, what is the goal, right? Is the goal for everybody who's out on the street to have socks and showers? Well, if that's your goal, then you're going to organize a program to give people showers and distribute socks. But if the goal is to get people off the street, you're going to organize your efforts in a very different way. That doesn't mean you don't give people showers or socks, but it does mean that that's not what you're aiming toward, that's not what you're organizing toward, that's not how you design your programs. You're designing programs so that people don't live out on the street. And I think one of the most profound mistakes we made as a society is unconsciously, we made the decision that a certain level of homelessness is just kind of inevitable, that for a series of rationalizations, oh, they want to be out on the street, oh, they're mentally ill and they can't make intelligent choices. Oh, we just got this idea in our mind somehow that we're just going to have to live with a certain level of homelessness. That's not true in the vast majority of Europe. It's not true in the vast majority of countries in Asia who share our same level of prosperity, same level of sophisticated technology. It's not acceptable for people to be out on the street. And so if our goal is to get people off the street as quickly as possible, you have to recognize that people come in a whole range of challenges. Yes, there are people who are mentally ill, a tremendous number of them. Yes, there are people who at this particular moment do not want help. But there are plenty of people who do want help, who need help, and who are stuck in bureaucracies and paperwork and falling between the cracks. So we need to focus on the ones where we can actually make a difference today, this week, this month, to get them off the street. Now, of course, that sets up a longer term challenge, right? Which is, it's one thing to get people off the streets, in order to securely and safely house them over a long period of time. again, thinking in terms of 21st century government, that's not always the job of government, right? Families, churches, communities, businesses, they all can play a positive role here. And sometimes government becomes too fixated that we have to have all the answers, we have to have all the resources, instead of partnering with other institutions in our society to help solve these problems. I think there's a tremendous hunger out there for people to help. And you see it in people kind of reflexively either dropping a $5 bill in somebody's hand thinking, I don't feel good about this, but I want to do something, or not putting a $5 bill and then spending the rest of the day feeling guilty that, gosh, I could have given that guy a meal. But there's much more sensible ways to deal with this problem than worrying about whether you give someone a $5 bill or not. We need to be putting the resources of talent and volunteer time and donations into building a system that gets the right help to the right people at the right time, with the goal of making homelessness rare, which means we work on the prevention side, brief, which means we don't spend months getting people through paperwork nightmares to finally get them into either shelter or transitional housing or permanent housing, and non-recurring, which is we're working on the back end. Not everyone needs a free apartment or wants a free apartment or will succeed in a free apartment, and we don't have enough money to give everyone a free apartment. So let's make sure that the housing back end meets the needs of people. And that's that they have enormous diversity. Some people just need a job. And some people just need a first and last month's rent to get back in the housing market. Some people will need a small subsidy while they go to school and learn a more lucrative career. And some people will need to be housed in institutional settings for the rest of their lives because of severe, incurable mental and physical ailments. So let's get the right help to the right people at the right time and recognize that government doesn't have all the answers. Let's partner with the other institutions in our society. Let's treat this as an emergency. Let's actually get back to the place where you don't see homeless people out on our streets.
I think to add, I think ownership is a big deal. Rick just mentioned who's taking on that initiative of homelessness, right? Who owns it? Who's going to be responsible for it? Who's going to draft out the measurement of success or the goals? As he mentioned, is it just to put socks on them and make sure they have showers, or is it to house them? And what would that look like for different individuals on a case-by-case basis, right? But it begins with ownership, which comes back to that 21st century mindset where you got to own something, right? You got to be vested in that, and you got to be held accountable for that, right? And you have to be accountable not only just for delivering the service, but for delivering the solution to the problem that you're trying to fix, right?
Your goal is to have successful outcomes. It's not just to have activity, right? We talked to this many people with our outreach teams. We contacted this many people. That's great. That is a helpful internal metric, but that has nothing to do with whether those were successful. That's where your word accountability comes in. And I think people are expecting accountability. They're expecting it from our public schools. They're expecting it from now our public institutions. We're giving you money, and in the case of homelessness, a great deal of money. Are you solving the problem? And in terms of who owns it, I think Mayor Bass is a great example. Mayor Karen Bass got elected on her first day at 9 o'clock in the morning. She declared emergency around homelessness. She's devoted laser focus to this. I think she's showing what catalytic leadership looks like. But I think it's key to recognize that no matter how hard she works, no matter how much money she devotes to this, the city of Los Angeles cannot solve this single-handedly. It needs the other 87 cities in the county to work closely and to make their fair share contribution to the challenge, including the ones who don't have homeless individuals now, because Los Angeles is carrying a disproportionate number of them. It takes the county of Los Angeles, it takes the state government, but it also takes, again, our churches and synagogues and mosques. It takes our community organizations. It takes our business community. It takes our civic institutions and nonprofits. And so government can be a catalyst, but it can't have all the answers to all the problems. And so it has to collaborate effectively with other institutions in our society. Again, the 20th century idea was basically, okay, we've got to win World War II, so let's give the government all the power and centralize everything in the Pentagon, and by God, we're going to beat the Japanese and the Germans, and we're going to outproduce them and mobilize the entire society under the role of government. That won the war, but it's not a good model for a challenge like homelessness. We can't be a Pentagon for homelessness. There has to be a collaborative around it.
Well, you add to that the political aspect of it. I mean, there's definitely government gets reelected every now and then there's new head of the government. Unless everybody shares the same goal and it makes it a priority of the constituents, kind of like a public service in a sense. And we gonna need to tackle this regardless of who's in office. It's gonna be difficult to tackle it. And for that to happen, there needs to be a level of trust and accountability. Talking about 21st century, communities in general, they want reports, they want metrics, they want to see progress. They want to measure whether there is positive impact happening at that level, or do they need to switch gears and do something else. I think that's where 21st century thinking, on-demand numbers, like you mentioned, the mobile app, those kind of things can really help build that trust bridge between those community members, the religious institutions, all the benefactors that you talked about earlier, along with the government, to be able to tackle this together.
Your listeners kind of understand how to bring these abstractions, not just to the case study of homelessness, but to a whole series of challenges from climate change to our changing economy post-COVID, with so many offices empty and small businesses struggling in our downtown areas. The tool is called CompStat, and it comes from law enforcement, but the tool has nothing to do with crime or police or law enforcement. It's a problem-solving methodology. CompStat stands for comparative statistics, and it replaced the kind of anecdotal way in which police often dealt with various forms of crime, right? So you can kind of imagine a grizzled sergeant on the day watch handing over to the sergeant on night watch. So there's a bunch of auto burglaries we're seeing. Stay on that. And comparative statistics, CompStat, actually isolated, well, how many auto burglaries? Where did they take place? What time did they take place? What kind of cars were involved? Is there any pattern between that and people who've just been released from prison for auto burglary in the neighborhood? Where are the cars ending up after they've been stripped and abandoned? All of these things then got pasted on a board for people to look at. Here are the 4 principles of CompStat, which again have nothing to do with crime or police. First, timely and accurate data, right? So not just, well, we got a lot of auto burglaries, but exactly where and how and when. The second is develop effective tactics. So what are we going to do about this challenge? And once you have isolated some of the issues, let's take homelessness. Let's say 10% of your folks are veterans. Well, that means that you can zero in on connecting those 10% to Veteran Administration benefits. And that may be a way to get half or 3/4 of them off the street because they've been wandering around. They've had eligibility for healthcare and housing and income support, but they haven't been connected. By connecting them, so that's development of effective tactics. The third principle is rapid deployment of resources. Government so often will do a 5-year strategic plan and take 5 years to do it. 5 years to make the plan, and then it goes on the shelf. Rapid deployment means, what are we going to do today, tomorrow, next week, next month, and actually start trying things right now, instead of spending months debating and pondering and discussing what we might do. Actually try some things at a small scale and see if they work. And the things that work, you do more of, and the things that don't work, you try something else. And the last principle of the 4 principles is relentless assessment and follow-up, right? Did auto burglaries go down, right? Did we cut the auto burglaries? Did we eliminate the auto burglaries that take place, at night? And if we did, then we should keep doing what we're doing. And if we didn't, then we should try something else. So that cycle, timely and accurate data, development of effective tactics, rapid deployment of resources, and then relentless assessment, is a way to tackle what seems like a big amorphous cloud problem: homelessness, climate change, crime, and actually isolate it down to specifics with timely and accurate data, so you can pinpoint your effective tactics to actually reduce the problem and to begin to build solutions. That's a different methodology than, well, let's see, what should we do? We'll pass a new policy, then next year we'll budget the staff to work on the policy. Then they'll get hired and trained, and they'll start working on the policy. And then years later, we wonder, how come we released 50,000 nonviolent felons from our prisons without adequate resources to get them placed in jobs and be able to stand self-sufficiently on their own? We've actually made the exact same mistake that everyone in society now knows, that it was a mistake back in the 60s and 70s to close state mental institutions without replacing them with a better system of mental health care. Everyone knows that. Well, we're going through that exact same thing now, where for smart economic and humanitarian and social reasons, we decided that keeping nonviolent felons in state prison at a cost of more than $100,000 a piece every year was a bad idea. And so we should reduce our prison population. But what we didn't do, we didn't have timely and accurate data. Where are they going? How are they doing? Are they coming back into jail because they're committing more crimes because they don't have any other alternatives? What are we doing to place those 50,000 people back into our society and set them on the goal of them living productive lives and being law-abiding citizens? The absence of that kind of intelligent intervention and accountability then spills out, and we wonder, I wonder why there's a whole bunch of people out on the street.
Data could be extremely powerful, I think. I think data will become the new currency in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And if we can have like a data repository and collect these different touch points, right? And make business decisions or civic decisions based on that, I think you'll start to see a change where you're not seeing the effects, you're preemptively deploying those resources when you're making these decisions.
And we knew exactly how many of them are now employed, how many of them are housed, how many of them have been rearrested, how many of them are back in jail. And what if that were a dashboard like we have test scores for our schools? What if we actually were paying attention to how well we were doing on that? Not with the idea of, heads will roll but to figure out, okay, what's going wrong and how can we fix it? That kind of transparency is what leads to accountability. But if people don't know the shape of the problem, or have only a once a year count, as we do with homelessness, or no count at all about what has happened to these folks that have been released from prison, There isn't any accountability because there's no transparency to be able to even know how big the problem is, what the shape of the problem is, how bad it is. And so we go on anecdotes, right? And Fox News will say, oh, California is in the midst of a horrific crime wave, and everybody is hiding under their bed and living in fear. And then MSNBC will say, "Oh, that's all a big exaggeration," and California continues, blah blah blah. And none of that is based in reality. It's all based in kind of imagery and anecdote and whatever will get clickbait. Um, the reality should be we should ground our decisions in sound data. And if something isn't working, rather than apologizing or obfuscating or pretending it doesn't exist, let's jump on the problem and try to solve it.
It's interesting how a lot of the innovation starts in private sector and then makes its way to the public sector. And you recently we've been hearing the concept, well, recent few years now, the concept of smart city. And smart city is all about data and leveraging data to use AI to make the city smarter, but it's always related to infrastructure. It's rarely related to social issues, which are also part of our cities. Why do you think is that? Why are we not seeing more smart city kind of thinking applied to social issues just like it is to infrastructure issues?
Used to flow the other way. That, for example, in the space program, the private sector ended up adapting many of the things that were innovated by a government-led effort to put a person on the moon. So it isn't just inevitable that the private sector will be the innovative engine of new ideas. But I do think what you pointed to is part of the challenge here. Is we've forgotten that government can innovate and the government should innovate, and that every sector, whether you're a university, a hospital, a private corporation, or a local government, you should be thinking about, are there better, faster, cheaper, more effective ways of doing what we're doing, or maybe even change what we're doing because it's no longer needed. So that challenge of why it isn't applied to social, I think we've forgotten that we can innovate in the public sector, that we can try dramatically different things. I will again give Mayor Bass some credit here. This program has not been rolled out. Her Inside Safe program has not been rolled out smoothly or with perfection. She'd be the first to admit it, and it has. But she's trying, right? And we should be learning from what's going right, and we should be learning from what's not going right, and continuing to refashion that. Again, transparency really helps in that. And the mayor was criticized early on by council members for being less than transparent, because I think she was worried about the baby being strangled in the crib, right? Give me a little bit of chance to see how this is going to work before I start sharing how it's working. But it's absolutely crucial that we understand how it's working, because that's the only way we can learn. And mistakes are inevitable if you're trying new things. Edison famously tried like 100 different materials before he discovered tungsten for the electric light bulb. He tried bamboo, he tried steel, he tried literally over 100 different materials. If you said, "Oh, Edison, what a waste," right? You've gone through 99 and you haven't produced a breakthrough here, a time to defund you. That would have been a tragic mistake. So I think there has to be, from the public standpoint, a little bit of understanding that things won't always go smoothly. There's a huge difference between something that doesn't go right because you were trying something new, and something that doesn't go right because you're continuing to do the same thing over and over again and it's no longer working.
You mentioned earlier the importance of the community to get involved in the issue. 21st century is like Josie said, is very data driven. It's very techy. There's a lot of private companies, such as ourselves, who really want to help in the matter, who do have the know-how, the talent, the expertise to be able to tackle some of these issues. How can these private companies get involved? How could they help in changing the narrative around these social issues or around government in general?
Our procurement systems were designed for the industrial age, right? Where the city's ordering so many yards of concrete, or contracting for someone to pave a street, or to buy street lights, or to buy new patrol cars. And so we know what we want, and we have a very bureaucratic system, but it's meant to avoid overpaying, and it's meant to avoid corruption. The trouble is that if it takes a year, which it does, to start from scratch to figure out how to buy something new, right? We're actually pretty efficient at buying pencils and bullets and things like that. But if you want to buy something that you don't already know what it is, then you've got to write an actual, what they call specifications, which ultimately translates into a bid or a request for proposals. That can take, in the city of Los Angeles, over a year. Well, by that time, technology has actually moved on, right? You're buying last year's iPhone instead of next year's iPhone. So we have to fix our procurement system. That causes most people's eyes to glaze over. Procurement system, what the heck does that have to do with anything? And yet, if we're going to have government have the right tools to do the job well, you don't want to hand out Selectric typewriters to your folks. You want them to have the data tools that will help them solve problems. You know, the funny thing is that Amazon now knows enough to, and Google knows enough to place an ad. If you almost even think about buying a new car or remodeling your bathroom, you're going to start seeing ads everywhere you look for those things. And yet government continues to sort of operate with 10, 20, 30-year-old technology. So that is a challenge that needs to be solved, and it starts with fixing our procurement system, because we're not ordering bullets and books and things like that are commodities. We're ordering capacity, tools that are ever evolving and getting better and better.
I think at the federal level, they've realized that they do need private organizations. We had Elon Musk and a couple of other big organizations go to Fed this week to discuss about AI and the effects of it and the cybersecurity around it. I would like to see something like that at a local level or at a state level. I'm sure that Amazon would send a representative over to kind of tackle some of these. Facebook Pixel is what you're talking about, Rick. That'll kind of carry you around everywhere. Tag managers, that comes from Google. I'm pretty sure that they wouldn't mind sitting with one of the largest cities, in the entire United States to kind of help problem solve through a committee-led initiative. Versus, obviously, procurement is another way of getting in, but I do think that there's committees that can be formed or that would go maybe across the aisle from private public organizations.
I think legitimately a lot of people, potentially even those listening in, will say, oh, wait a minute, do I want big government getting in bed with big tech and controlling my life? Now, that may not be a rational fear, but there are reasons to be paranoid about some of those things. So that's why transparency is really important. We shouldn't be doing all these deals in the back room. That's probably the antidote to our antiquated procurement system. Instead of having these long, cumbersome processes, let's just make the deals between government and private sector tech companies very transparent. What are they up to? What are they doing? That ought to be on the website. That ought to be easily accessible. And then we can also track outcomes. Are those producing real results? Nothing in life, and especially in government, is going to be universally successful or universally popular. There are always going to be critics, and there's a role for critics, because critics sometimes save us from making big mistakes. And that's where transparency comes into play. We want to make sure that the public understands what's going on, rather than finding out about it years later that they've been spied upon or that their data has been shared with people that they don't want to share it with. Let's be transparent about it. But then the public also has to accept that if they want better outcomes, that government is going to need to sharpen its tools. That's a duality, right? We're going to give you new tools, but we're going to expect those tools not to be used against us. And that's a hard balance, but it's one that if by avoiding it, we condemn government to being kind of in the dark ages.
Well, Rick, fascinating discussion. Um, Unfortunately, time is coming to an end. We've discussed a lot of topics. You shed some light on some very, very unknown topics to most constituents. So we talked about the old way of governing, making old problems, new problems fit in old processes. We talked about how to address old problems as if they are new. Stats, social, and smart data. If there was one thing you would like our audience to go home with, uh, what would that be, Rick? Final word, golden nuggets, something for us to all remember.
We can and should expect better. Um, from those who want to see government play a bigger role in issues like homelessness and climate change and to solve them, we should expect that government do a better job with the money that it has to be more effective at, at solving those challenges. And to those who are dubious, the government screws everything up, I don't want to give any more money to the government's inherently inefficient, to recognize that what's the alternative, right? Are we just going to let some of these problems continue to fester? Let's move away from this kind of polarized red-blue, should we have more government, should we have less government? Let's have smarter government. Let's have more nimble government. Let's have more responsive government. It's not the people in government that are the problem, it's the systems and the outmoded tools. Let's redesign our systems, let's improve and enhance our tools, and let's produce better outcomes. That is possible. We are not condemned to stand in line for 6 hours at the DMV. They can come up with innovations like appointments, right? And suddenly the experience at the DMV is changed. So if the DMV can change, so can every other government function, and they do. And when they do, they produce better results. We live longer lives, we live happier lives, we live better lives, and more people get to benefit from this great American system that has its challenges, but government can play a role in giving everyone a fair shake. And if we have the attitude that, well, it is the way it is, we're limiting ourselves from making it better.
My final thoughts. You can't throw the baby out with the diaper, okay? We need government. We need them to do what they do and to do it well. And us as private organizations, as he said, faith-based organizations, we need to work with them and we need to be bravely in front of it to try to fix this issue.
Rick said it best. We can and should expect better. So, Rick, thank you very much for being here with us today. We really enjoyed your presence and your insight on the matter. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Josie.
Always happy to be here.
And thank you, everybody, for being with us. Please share, like, and subscribe. Recall, thank you again, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.